Today's webinar, Learning Trends, Ignoring the Clutter, reviews where we've been in 2018 and where we're going in 2019. Our presenter today is Jeff Carpenter, founder and CEO of Cavio Learning. Jeff has presented at some of the nation's foremost learning and development conferences, including Elliott Macy's Learning, the Corporate L&D Institute, the Learning Leaders Conference, and the Center for Talent Reporting's annual conference, as well as the Society for Human Resource Management's International Conference. He's been published in Chief Learning Officer, Learning Solutions Magazine, Training, CIO, and Workforce, among others. He holds a master's degree in training and development from Roosevelt University and a bachelor's degree in human resources from the University of Nebraska. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, thank you, Laura, appreciate it. So as we go through today, like Laura said, we will be covering some of the trends that we put out from last year, kind of to review some of those, where they're at, kind of what has happened between this time last year and now, as well as looking forward into some of the other trends that we have coming. And these are not ones from analysts that are going on. These are really from spending time talking with and working with some of our clients, as well as some of the learning leaders that are currently in the space. So these are people that are actually doing the work out there in the field, all the good work that's going on, and really kind of starting to capture some of those things that are going to be happening going forward. So we should have a pretty good, robust conversation at this point. So a little bit about Cavio. We'll spend just a moment or two on that. So Cavio, what we do is we really want to drive, our passion as an organization is to drive business value through learning. So really looking at how learning can be leveraged inside the business to really drive business value. So looking at it from the standpoint of how can you quantify the investment, the business investment in learning. That is one of the biggest critical pieces we feel that we should be doing as we move forward inside of the L&D space. That's absolutely mission critical, not only to make sure that the organization understands the value, but also that we're pulled into conversations early because of the value that we can bring to the table. Because who touches their most valuable, the business's most valuable asset the most? That's learning and development. So what we do as an organization, we are a learning consulting organization. We do really four different aspects. So we do strategic learning consulting. That is, we work with organizations on everything from change management, mergers and acquisitions, consolidations, doing curriculum architecture, design and development, standard operating procedures. So all of the large heavy lifting consulting components that revolve around that. We also do learning and performance solutions. So working with our instructional design team to be able to create and design impactful learning solutions for organizations. We also have learning technologies, so our technology team can develop and deploy learning solutions to really help drive the strategic vision of your organization. And then lastly is around execution support. We have a different approach to doing managed services, really looking at, and we have organizations that will outsource pieces or parts of their organization all the way up to and including their entire departments. How we focus on that is a little bit different, is we don't believe that you should sacrifice cost for quality and impact. So we really make sure that that you still receive a very high level of service as you outsource or augment your existing staff. Okay, so let's get into first really some of the predictions for 2018 that we had. I really want to stress that that in this thing I'm not a futurist, so I don't look at it from the standpoint of what's going to happen, 5 years from now or what have you. It's really looking at a very pragmatic approach to saying, here's what's really going on in the space, here's where people are heading in the space, and here's what you need to think about and consider as you look at your strategic plan over the next 12 months to 36 months. So really starting to look at that continuum. Just because things are going on in 2018 or happened in 2018 or 2019 doesn't mean you need to hop onto that bandwagon to make sure that you can get there. You have to be able to look at this and say, is it really right for me and the organization? Is it going to help drive my strategic vision? And if not, that's okay. But it's really good to know kind of what you need to do, not only from where are you heading, but also some of the basic blocking and tackling that will enable you to get to where you want to get to. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So one of the first predictions for 2018 was about learning getting downsized. So there was a big push last year to really take those large pieces or the large knowledge assets that were currently in place and be able to start to look at how to deconstruct those, to start to integrate those into really integrating learning into the daily workflow. So taking those things, making more performance support-ish type of pieces, making the breaking down those pieces into chunks. So when you talk about, you know, a little 5 to 10 minute chunk of learning, so that could be truly be integrated in. It was there when you needed it. It was accessible when you needed it. This was a very big component to, as we start to look towards 2019, this was the beginning phase of saying, how do you deconstruct what you currently have? All of those learning assets that you have scattered across the organization, how can you start to look at those and say, in a 30-minute or a one-day program or, you know, whatever that you have there, what are the key learning elements that you can extract and make available to people, not only as a key source of learning, but also make it available to them as a way for them to be able to go back post-learning, to be able to refresh their what they learned, be able to implement, or those things that don't happen very often. So it made it so that it was available to them. That whole process is going to become very instrumental as we look towards 2019. AR versus VR, so augmented reality versus virtual reality. So let me kind of define those two for each of you. So virtual reality, when you think of virtual reality, putting on the goggles and you are transported to a virtual world, if you will. So there's that whole kind of virtual world aspect to it. Augmented reality is you also put on some glasses, but what it does is it does basically an overlay on top of your existing world. So as you look around, you'll see something kind of come up in front of you that you can then interact with or work through. Now, what we're seeing in these two pieces is that AR and VR really started to come out and be more affordable for people. And I think the biggest thing that people are struggling with is really two things. One of them is was the misnomer that the cost of AR and VR was restrictive in allowing organizations to start to get to it. The second is just a general understanding of how to leverage it appropriately, not only just in the learning space, but also when you start to look at it and extending it into operations, and be able to say, okay, how can we really rope this in from an operational standpoint and leverage it? So this was, I think, a critical piece last year or this year, as we started to lock in how can operations and training work more closely together. It's really looking at how can AR and VR be able to create those immersive environments, or be able to create those elements that really start to trick the brain into feeling like it was a real experience. Some just on a side note, some of the things that they're starting to figure out with AR and VR is that they didn't realize the spatial aspect. So when you walk into a room and from your brain standpoint to get the spatial, it's actually your sense of smell is also included in that. So there's been some things now around how can they add in kind of the sense of smell into that to be able to fully trick the brain into feeling that you are in an immersive environment, that you are truly having an experience that makes it more difficult for your brain to delineate between the two. So some of the things that have been going on there with the VR. So you think about the virtual reality. Think about safety training. Think about you can do some virtual sales training. So you walk into a virtual office and talk with somebody. So there's a lot of different things that you can do in there. Medical spaces. If you're into being a phlebotomist, so that way you're not stabbing somebody's arm over and over again. You can actually do it in a virtual reality. In AR, what we're starting to see a lot of is when people are looking at it from the standpoint of saying, how can we do an overlay? So if you're doing a safety check on a vehicle, or you're trying to do a repair piece, they can have the glasses be able to have it so that it starts to provide you the instructions, and the system will recognize what it is that you're looking at to provide you with detailed instruction around how to replace something or how to fix something, and be able to be connected back to a centralized help desk. So that way you can then start to interact with some subject matter experts that can then virtually have their hands come out basically in front of you and be able to show you the pieces that you need to do. So this is starting to speed up, but this was something that was just starting to come into effect this year. So the digital water cooler impact. So another big piece that we were looking at is saying, how can you organically share knowledge and skills across the organization? And being able to have more collaborative tools in place so that people can then work together virtually to help solve problems that come across, as well as being able to share knowledge. So start to share some of that knowledge across. As organizations need to become more of collectors of talent, that talent doesn't always reside in the same location. So how can you create an environment in which they can really start to interact with each other, problem solve together, be able to start to drive the pieces that they need to, which typically when people would walk around their office, as you look at from the water cooler pieces, how can they just be able to share information with each other in a way that helps really bring the knowledge up across the entire enterprise. So we're seeing a lot of different technologies that were being rolled out, really looking at to support the ease of collaboration across employees. There's been a lot of design and development of both some that are kind of just out there from the industry standpoint, but then we're also seeing a lot of homegrown systems being built that were very just specifically focused on just the collaborative piece and how to be able to create those collaborative environments. So this one always makes me laugh. So when you start to look at HR as a whole, and we'll keep learning and development to the side here for a second. HR, L&D typically falls underneath HR. It's a standalone. It can be in the operational side, but most of the time it's either kind of a standalone or floats underneath HR. What we're starting to see is this ongoing push to have HR be able to provide predictable talent decisions based off of data, so based off of metrics. This is difficult for an organization. HR is typically not an organization that likes to be measured. They love to measure everybody else, but don't like to be measured. So really being able to have them be able to say, okay, how can we, based on predictive analytics, how can we be able to say that somebody who's coming in that has these attributes will be successful in this job position over X period of time? So being able to start to look at what it is a job category is, what are the key success pieces, how can we analyze what are the things that they need to be successful, and then roll that backwards to say this is the type of person or persons that we're looking for to fill a given position that we know with a high level of probability that they're going to be successful. So being able to look at that and saying, okay, now we can start to get those people onboarded. That's where learning and development then comes in to play a part of that role as they have the predictive analytics that come in there to say, now here's how L&D can then start to interject itself into helping either speed up that or flatten out that learning curve, being able to provide them with the data that they're required to be more successful, more impactful earlier, and be able to reduce their efforts on really non-productive programs. So those programs that just provide no value or provide little value. How do you start to clip those down and really start to get to the meat of it, and understanding how much somebody really needs when they come in based on their talent profile. So how can you start to get them to be able to down select, and really integrating very tightly in with HR, but it required HR to start to look at how to analyze the talent management. So there's been some big pushes this year around that, big discussions around that. There was even an international effort in place that's fallen apart. It's being resurrected again to really look at what are some standard HR analytics that can be leveraged across that all HR can use across. Well, you can well imagine everybody wants to feel that their analytics, their data analytics, their profiling is unique to them. So it's going to be an interesting piece, because I think the last one was going on for, I think, 3 or 4 years before internationally started to fall apart. I know it's been resurrected, or there's been another one that's been resurrected again, that there are some organizations that are currently working on that. Having the focus shift away from training, you're hearing a lot of people, instead of talking about training, now they're talking about how can you help people perform better. And so we need to look at ourselves not as learning and development people, not as training folks, but really how do you get people's performance at a higher level. So looking at to say, we're not there to necessarily train people. We're there to help come in and analyze what's going on, to identify what the root cause is, to be more learning consultants in there as you approach it, and be able to have that full toolkit of things that you can provide. and be able to come to the table and say, listen, based on our analysis, it's not necessarily training may or may not be a component of it, but here are the other pieces that you can add into it. And if you can come in there and be that objective consultant to the business, it will allow you to be able to be a long-term partner with them because they start to see the impact of the solutions that you're providing to the organization. As an example, we were called in to talk with an organization around how can they train people to sell better. It was the basic construct around that. But really, when we started to get into it, it's not that they needed to be trained better. It was really more around how can their incentives were aligned incorrectly. The reward system was aligned incorrectly. So we started to have conversations with them around those things. Learning was a very small piece of it, but coming in there and being able to have that broader conversation with the organization really helped be able to have people understand that we're not just here to help fulfill learning, that learning requirement or punch the ticket. It's really looking at how can we help the organization perform better. And that means things beyond just learning. It could be change management, it could be communications, could be process, could be incentives, could be all of those types of things. And it's really important that you start to really look at what is the root cause of those performance issues. As you start to look at driving those things, now it's saying, okay, now it's how can we be results oriented? So getting out from underneath people saying, well, I need this or I need that, where they start to tell us what's needed, but being able to say, listen, here's what we can provide to you. Here's what the solution looks like. Here's what the results will look like once we're done if we implement it. Here's what your responsibility is as a business owner, because they have to also understand, the business people that we're supporting, L&D doesn't own anything. So we can help the performance, we can help identify what the issues are. We can provide them with the appropriate learning, the appropriate post-learning support. And then what it comes down to is now what are the post-learning strategies that the business is going to implement to continue to drive that change or drive the performance, and what are they going to do to incent or disincent people just kind of floating back. So spending time up front to talk about what are the results that you're trying to get to, what everybody's role is in that, what needs to be done when, would really helps people understand what it is that L&D does, but also more importantly, what their role in it is. So I always jokingly say that L&D is the cause of and the solution to all of business's problems. So it's how do we get beyond that piece and be able to say we need to truly partner together to make sure that we can drive that change. We've seen things where we've worked with organizations, in the front end, we've helped them exceed what it is that they were looking for in the first 90-day push from a performance standpoint. And then what happens is we can also, then we start to watch, after that 90 days, things start to kind of flutter down because the business hasn't implemented their portion of it. So that we can then go back in there and say, okay, now we need to get that piece in place. And they recognize that they need to own that moving forward, because L&D can't own it forever. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pause here real quick. I'm going to turn it back over to Laura, so that way she can, if anybody has any questions about the 2018 before I get into the 2019, now's the time to go ahead and type in any questions that you have. Laura is also, if you've typed them in already, she's probably has either answered you or is getting them ready for me. But I'll pause here really quick and turn it back over to Laura here for just a minute.
All right, super. Thanks, Jeff. One question, you had mentioned the digital water cooler impact, and you had mentioned that the workforce is changing. There's tribal knowledge that's becoming increasingly important to share. What are some ways that the L&D organizations can help facilitate helping others share that information?
Sure. I think it's part of it is you need to encourage and insist that groups within the organization work more closely together. So creating those work groups that are across, and really looking at when you start to deploy teams, you take a very senior person, you take somebody who's a little bit new so that they can start to share that and build that network. Because you want to start looking at the tribal knowledge, it's really around creating the network, helping them create those networks and those connections so that they can start to share that knowledge across. And even the new folks coming in have things to share with the folks that have been there for a long time, but it's important that you create virtual teams that approach a common issue that's there to be resolved And so they have those different perspectives, and they have the different ways to be able to share kind of what's gone on in the past, where it's going, is I think absolutely critical as you start to do that. But you have to insist that those things take place.
Yeah. Okay, great. And this is just a general comment. It seems that the L&D relationship with HR is even more important as it relates to moving from training to performance.
It is, and I would say the tricky part is as L&D starts to migrate over towards doing more performance-based solutions, there's going to be a little bit of stepping on the toes of a traditional HR organization, because a lot of times OD, so the organizational development, resides inside of HR,
Right.
and that's their lever that they pull. It's they have to be okay with sharing that responsibility, because there are times that somebody will come to L&D, there are times that somebody's going to go to HR formal, but it's important that those two groups work together, and what'll happen over time is you'll start to see those two things blur together.
Okay, great. Well, hey, let's move forward to 2019.
All right, let's do this. All right. All right, so I think as we get into 2019, it's important that I'm going to cover off on a couple of things before I get into the predictions. So as you start to look at the workforce profile, and this is going to be important to understand as we start to move through the rest of it, is this is from Pew Research analysis of a population survey that was done as of 2017. So what you start to look at is you see the baby boomers really are 25% of the overall workforce. The millennials, and the thing is, the one thing I always start to cringe at is we need to stop talking about the millennials, quite frankly. They're here, they're in the workforce. A lot of them are in their 30s, so they're here. So if you haven't already planned for the millennials, too late. What needs to be happening as the boomers start to retire, and I would encourage any boomers that are around here, the golf course is awesome, from a Gen Xer standpoint. So as you start to look at it, it's the Gen Xers. So the people that were getting the business ready for the millennials to come in were really the boomers and the Gen Xers. We're getting kind of the infrastructure laid, getting those things in place, getting things ready to go. As we start to look at it, the Gen Xers and the millennials, now it's our turn to start to look at the Gen Z, because they're starting to come here pretty quick. So as you start to look at it right now, and this is a worker 16 years and older, the needs that they're going to have, the way that you approach not only learning from a learning standpoint, but really how they access and consume data is going to be completely different. What we're also seeing right now in the Gen Z, there's this kind of this weird dichotomy that's starting to happen. There are some people that are foregoing and just getting rid of all of the social media and all the other stuff. They kind of are starting to push it aside a little bit because it's so all-consuming, and others that are getting deeper into it. So I think over time we're going to see that kind of mush together a little bit more, because they're still kind of young in their growth pattern. But so as we start to look at what's going to happen, is you have to start looking at how the workforce expectations are going to shift and evolve over time, because as we start to look at it, it's not really laying the groundwork in the infrastructure. And I can look back to, I remember when I first started talking with my bosses at the time, was working for a local Bell, and we implemented the company's first intranet. L&D did. So IT folks didn't even know what it was. Implemented the first performance support, the first e-learning modules, all those types of things. Where back then it was cutting edge and difficult and all those heavy lifting that was happening, but that was the beginning stages of kind of where we're at now. So we were, way back, we were kind of the mad scientists working with this new internet technology. So we need to start really looking at again is what do we think the next level of technology is going to be? And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit, but it's really, we need to start focusing on Gen Z, start looking at what are the trends that they're having. The millennials will come in and continue to put their stamp on things, but getting the organizations ready for them to come in, we're already way past that. The other thing as we start to look at is the workforce itself. We're just getting out of, we've been out of the recession here for a little while. Recovery is happening. The issue that we have right now is that while the recession was going on, there was a couple of things that were happening. There was low movement inside of the workforce. So people stayed put. They hunkered down. They stayed put. Organizations, when they laid people off, they didn't reinvest in the people that stayed. So there's this stagnant learning took place. So there wasn't a lot there. People were really concerned about spending money on upskilling themselves because they didn't know what was going to happen. And then you have people that had left the workforce for a period of time, and now we're trying to come back into the workforce. So what you're seeing is what we're starting to see is you have the skill expectations very high, the skill reality is low. So people are coming in with a lower skill level, or identifying people that have the types of skills that the workforces or the employers are looking for. There's a large gap there. So from the standpoint of what are organizations doing to help be able to really look at this, there's a lot of retraining opportunities that are happening. So when somebody comes in, maybe they have 80% of what you're looking for, and then how do you provide them with that extra 20%? So really kind of looking at that. In the hiring practices, what they're doing is those times now, it's taking longer to fill roles, but it's, what are the key aspects of what you're looking for? So what are the most critical? So if you have a list of 10 things, what are the 6 most critical things that somebody must have? And I use the example of, can you teach somebody to be an engineer? Yes. Is it easier to hire somebody that's an engineer and then give them the skills, the business skills that they need, or the whatever those other skills are? So you have to start to look at what are those critical hiring skills that you need, and then from an L&D and HR standpoint, how can you, we were talking last year, how can you start to get that ready for them so that you can personalize the learning environment for them, so that each individual is a little bit different. And we'll talk more about that here in just a minute. We're also seeing a reconfiguration of roles. So instead of somebody having being kind of a jack of all trades, we're starting to see things kind of breaking apart so that people are becoming very specialized in certain areas. Now, there are pros and cons to that specialization. If somebody is very specialized in a certain niche, what you're going to see is now, instead of being able to fulfill 2 or 3 roles that they would normally fill, they're just filling 1. Well, then the wages start to go down because of that impact and that pressure. So a lot of organizations, what they're doing is they're reconfiguring the role so they can identify in the hiring process what's that critical role that they need. They can identify what that critical one is, and then start to provide them some retraining to be able to hopefully broaden them across. So there's a fight for talent that's going to be happening here, and it's already started, but it's gonna heat up very quickly. The other piece of that is because people are having such a hard time identifying what it is that they're really truly looking for, and identifying, getting that core talent that they want. We're finding that a lot of people are starting to look towards outsourcing, where they can go to an organization and be able to say, I need this type of skill, I need this type of output, I need these types of things. They can start to dictate exactly what they need, and then the outsourcer, it's their job to then identify, hire, train people, do all of those things, and it makes it easier for organizations to be able to fulfill more of the tactical roles, not necessarily the learning consultant roles, but more of the instructional design roles, more of the technology development, those types of things. It's less expensive, and they can get the exact talent that they want to leverage when they need it. The last part of that is around workforce automation. So we're seeing a lot of things. People are saying, since we can't get everybody to do everything that we need, how can we start to automate parts of the workforce to be able to reduce the overall cost? So what are those pieces that were typically done by lower skilled workers? Can we then put those automate those and be able to leverage people in those reconfigured roles, so that they can focus on just very intricate areas and allow certain systems and profiles to be able to drive those. So if you keep that in mind as we start to go forward, a lot of these other things will start to make more sense here. All right, so strategic direction. So let's talk about the strategic direction. As we roll into 2019, L&D is starting to spend more and more time really looking at where does the business want to head. So as an organization, where is the organization heading? Working with the leaders, the business leaders, to say, what is it that you're trying to accomplish over the next couple of years? Where is the business heading? What are not just the next 6 months or 12 months, but really what's the longer strategic vision, so that L&D can then start to craft its vision to really get ahead of the business, to prepare the organization for the eventual future state that it needs to be at. And this looks at really creating and defining your strategic visions, your goals, your value propositions for the L&D organization. And it also allows you to be able to say, here's where we're heading, here's how it supports where the business is going, so that you can then start to capture more capital and the operational budget, and resourcing that you need, because if everybody understands where you're going and how you want to get there and how this aligns back to the business, you're going to see that there's a common shared direction and a common goal that's there. And people will understand how L&D is going to help them achieve what it is that they want to achieve. But then they know to make that happen, they have to invest in learning and development and the performance solutions that they're going to provide. Not the training, but the performance solutions that they're going to provide. So really helping operations become, make that transition and transition the organization to where it needs to be. So taking time and really sitting down saying, let me look at the strategic direction of the organization. Now, you typically don't want to go out more than 3 years or detailed more than 3 years. But you need to, it needs to be a living document. You need to go back to it about every 6 months and really update those things to make sure that, you know, and assess new technologies that come out, new processes that come out, new direction that comes out, a change in the corporate environment, you know, change in the consumer environment, all of those things, so that you can continually assess where it's at currently and where you need to head, and what adjustments do you need to make. And there are times that there might be something that comes in, the shiny things that come in, new technologies come in, new direction comes in, and you have to be able to assess that, because I think too many times we start to kind of look and go, oh, there's this new thing, I need to go after that. Not necessarily. There are times where you take a look at it and go, you know what, that sounds interesting, I'm going to keep an eye on that, but right now it doesn't make sense for what we're trying to accomplish, and that's okay. But that's a very pragmatic approach to how you support the business. All right, so the next one. So swinging the data lake. This is, we start to look at all the different pieces, all of the data analytics that are going on now, and being able to how to analyze data. There's a lot of data that comes in, and being able to leverage that data. So I'm going to talk about it in two aspects right now. One is, are you working with the organization to be able to leverage the data, the user data, the user performance data, as well as the business data, to assess the impact that your performance solutions have on the business? So when you go in and talk with a leader in the business, or you talk with somebody in the organization, you're providing them with a performance solution, but can you have that conversation about how you're going to measure the impact? So it's important that you have those conversations upfront around how are you going to measure the impact, how are you going to ensure that things are going in the right direction. If you see that it's not going in the right direction, what are some contingencies that you're going to put into place, and how are you going to monitor it long term? So these are all questions. These are all things that you need to have, conversations you need to have with the business. My one piece of advice to you around this: it's actually it's an easier conversation than most people think about. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out conversation. You need to know your business, and you need to know their business, not everything about it. Don't pretend to be an expert in their business. But there's a very simple question that you can ask. When somebody comes in, they have an issue, they're saying, well, there's a performance issue, we need training. The first question I typically ask is, how did you identify that this was an issue inside of your organization? And really, 9 times out of 10, what you'll do is they will pull whatever dashboard that they have, whatever data elements that they utilize, and they will show you exactly how they could identify the trend was going in the wrong direction. Now you know what they're looking at. You know how they're going to judge what the success level. Now you need to understand how to impact your solution, how it impacts that data element. The other piece around this in the data lake, and this is the thing, I know there's a lot of things going on around adaptive learning and AI and all that other good stuff, and there's a lot of things people are promising the world out there, and again, I'll get to that here in a second, is the part that people aren't talking about is all of the data that's going to come at you. So there are things out there called a data lake. If you don't know what a data lake is, you probably don't have one yet. But what a data lake is, it's basically it's a database of undefined data. So it comes in and it's just a dump of data that goes in, and you have to be able to figure out and parse, what does that data mean? Now that becomes important as you start to look towards the AI and the adaptive learning, because you have to be able to say, I have these knowledge elements. So I have all these little knowledge elements, and can I draw a straight line to how it affects performance? Now, that's going to take some time, because you have to be able to pull in all the live data that's coming in, the performance data. You have to pull in all of their personal performance data. So what have they taken? Where do they want to go? What does their profile look like? So there's all of these elements that are in there. And how do you start to look and parse that data so that you can then feed the machine that is AI and adaptive learning. So really looking at it from overall is how do you deal with all this data? So a big aspect or big part of what we're going to be doing as L&D folks is looking at how can we analyze this data so that we can ensure that what we're doing longer term is really impacting the business in a way. What is the data telling us? And so we can make decisions based on the data instead of the I think, I feel. This is what the data elements are telling me right now. So machine learning. So the machine learning, I think, is something that's starting to kind of come more into effect. It's really starting to drive a little bit more around, what it is that we push out to the organization. I think it's still in its infancy. There are some things people are going to start to really play with this a little bit more, but it's really allowing learning leaders to make more accurate data-driven decisions. And it's a lot of computational methods, a lot of statistics, a lot of, starting to look at the different curves and everything that you have in there. But it's to be able to improve the performance and make, it becomes more predictive analytics. So when you really look at what machine learning is, it's really predictive analytics. So, and we'll get into some of the other stuff, but you start to look at it's predicting what it thinks you're going to need. So when you start talking about AI, the artificial intelligence, what it does is it's basically predictive analytics. It can just take more data in and make decisions faster than you and I can. And it becomes it says, well, this has a X percentage probability that this is the direction that you should head, or this, should give you this piece of information or this piece of data. And what it's really doing is it learns over time. So it makes better choices. And that's really what AI, that's what the whole predictive analytics piece of this is. So I always tell people, don't get freaked out about AI. It is really predictive analytics. It only gets as smart as the data that you can feed it. So really looking at that last one is what's the data telling you, and what data are you going to feed the machine? So that way it can become smarter, it can become better, it can really start to look at those pieces. But it does come down to, did you break up your knowledge elements the right way? Do you have the right data tied to it? And how is that going to impact performance? So you start to kind of tie all those pieces together. So adaptive learning, it's coming out more and more. You're hearing more and more people talk about adaptive learning, but it's really more, and you have to define what is adaptive learning. A lot of people are talking about adaptive learning as inside of a e-learning module. If you answer a question a certain way, it's going to provide you a different outcome to it. That's it for those of you that are a little bit older. Those are your choose your own adventure books. So it still has an ending, but it is not true adaptive learning. Adaptive learning really it's a crossroads between what are the business drivers, what is the performance data of the individual, what are the knowledge clusters that you have, or the knowledge elements that you have, what are those assets that you're there, and what are the performance requirements? So it takes all of those pieces, all of that data, so that data lake that I was talking about, takes all those pieces and be able to say, based on you, the individual, based on your performance, live performance, based on where you want to head in there, based on what the business needs, and I'll give you an example here in a second, based on what the business needs, here's the pieces of learning, or here's the knowledge elements that you need to be successful. So as an example, we're working with an organization currently that they're in a call center, and what it does is it says, as they're coming up through their learning portal, it starts to look at and pulls in their performance data. It also looks at what are the business drivers that are going on. So are they getting more calls into one gate than a different gate, or queue? So if you want to say gates or queues. And then it says, okay, well, these are the people that, here's, Jim, the individual here, there's Jim and Sally, and based on what they need, it says, okay, their performance data is showing us these pieces, so I will give them a piece of learning that is unique to them, that is unique and meaningful and timely for them when they need it, how they need it, how they want to consume it, so they can be more productive immediately, and help drive that performance. But that is pulling in live data. So how can you, and live performance data. So you have to really understand very closely what does success look like? So what is it that the business is looking at from a success standpoint? How do they rate and judge against it, so that you can use that as part of the elements that you pull in? So adaptive learning, while it's on the outside, it's very sexy, it's kind of the holy grail for learning, you have to take a step back, and there's a lot of data elements that you need to look at. There's a data strategy that you have to have around that, and you have to have your content strategy wrapped around that to say, what are those knowledge assets? How do they tie to performance? And what does the data tell us as you do it? Because you're not going to be perfect. It's not going to be 100% right out of the gate. You're going to find things. You're going to kind of turn knobs on there, and also like something happens, like, oh, that didn't work, and then you want to turn it back a little bit. So it is a learning process. It's going to take time to be able to get to really where the adaptive learning needs to get to. But it really is important that you understand what adaptive learning really is. But it's pulling in a lot of data elements in there. There's a couple of them that I've seen out there now that they're starting to kind of get there. But it's important that you start to get before you do that, you want to make sure you start to get your data lake kind of pulled together and start to look at and interpret those pieces or those data elements. All right. This is one of my favorites. I'm hearing more and more about performance support. So if you think back to it, so back in the day, performance support was a big push. Now you hear about micro learning, nano learning. You're hearing about all these other things. And what's funny is when I'm starting to hear about micro learning and nano learning and these other deconstructed assets, and they're like, well, it needs to be in the moment, in the time. And I typically will lean forward. I go, back in the olden days, we used to call it performance support. So it's really now looking at, you have all those deconstructed data elements that are there, all the deconstructed performance pieces, all the deconstructed knowledge assets. How can you put a tool in place that allows them to be able to either access it in real time or have the system provide it to them in real time? So starting to see some of the things around using voice recognition technology, so that as people are having conversations, it starts to like automatically pull up the best guess of what you would need as you go through it. As people are typing in things, I'm sure you've seen some of the pieces when you're online. Their computer, the AI tries to interpret what you're saying, and here's the highest level things that are the best match. So it's important to start to look at those pieces and say, now where can we house all of these assets? How can we make sure that it's really providing the level of performance that people need? And it becomes part of your post learning strategy, as well as the performance support strategy. So you have to have, how are we going to help them perform and continue to perform at high level moving forward? The other big thing that we're seeing, and I talked earlier about, there's that kind of that gap that's happening with the baby boomers not retiring at that kind of traditional age. What we're seeing is that there's this large gap, and the businesses were not investing in leadership development for a number of years. So there's not just a gap in the leadership, there's a chasm in there for leadership, because people weren't being given the opportunity to grow as a leader, to experience new things, and to be able to really take on additional responsibilities around being a new leader. So so really looking at how can you fast track and start to really develop that muscle, that leadership muscle, is becoming an absolutely critical component for 2019. And they're really kind of starting to ditch the old way of doing it, the old traditional ways of doing it. And it's how can you not just kind of dunk them in the pool of leadership knowledge and then send them on their way, but it's really integrating in with existing leaders, providing them the network to be able to network and rely on other folks. So creating kind of those cohorts as you look at it, but also integrating their current leaders as part of their learning, to provide them with the opportunities for growth, and to really assist in their development process, to mentor, to coach, to guide, and to nurture that new talent. That is something that is absolutely critical to the millennials as they start to kind of grow up inside the organizations and become the next level of leaders. They don't want to be told how to do something. They want a coach. They want a mentor. They want somebody that they can go to help. Well, one is to offer up those opportunities, but then also have somebody that can help them coach and mentor them through those opportunities, so that they can see success and what does success look like. And if there's an issue, they have somebody they can go back to. So it becomes a combination of the existing leaders being really being there as a true coach and mentor, creating that network of folks, and creating opportunities, a series of shared opportunities or shared experiences. So it's formally informal. So as you start to create more toolkits and more things for their leaders, for the younger leaders, for their supervisors, their managers, being able to create those toolkits for them so they can help be able to really drive that change and provide them with those opportunities and those challenges, and then be able to help them, help scoop them up as they move forward. So the traditional constructs of leadership development has been pushed to the wayside. And a lot of that's being driven by that large chasm that has been created over the last 6-7 years. And it's becoming a real issue as the boomers start to really now leave. The process of retirement is starting to speed up a little bit. So I talked a little bit about AR/VR earlier, and it's starting to go really mainstream. I think we're starting to see more and more people are starting to adapt to it, play with it a little bit, and really looking at how can they partner with the business to design and develop learning pieces. The issue is going to be it's a technology with infinite possibilities. So how do you create a learning environment that is restrictive enough to keep them on task, but open enough to let them feel like it's an unlimited environment? So gaining those skills around how to create and develop those simulations or those situations are going to be absolutely critical, so you can start to blur the line between learning and the business itself, and spending time on the things that aren't necessarily important inside of the environment and things that are very important inside the environment, because the cost can go out of control really fast. There are things that are just add-ons, the eye candy, as it were. But what are the critical components that for somebody to be successful? So think of it this way, as an example. So if you were going to try to teach somebody in the oil and gas space on a rig, so they're on a rig, and all of a sudden there's they have some type of an emergency that happens. What's the most critical thing that you need to show them? So you need to start to really say, okay, what are the critical elements to get them to feel like they're there and to feel that, get their heart racing a little bit, but to get into it and fix it. So you don't necessarily need to see a seagull flying by, those types of things. So it's really making the trade-offs as to what is the most important pieces that you need to have, and what are the layers that you need to have, and all those types of things. So it's really going to be important that spending time with the SMEs to create those simulations, the avatars, all of those types of things, because the cost continues to go down. So the availability is going to be there, and it's a matter of also selecting between AR or VR. VR, you need to have the goggles, the space to be able to, because it is a spatial thing, so you need to be able to have the space to go do those types of things. AR, do you have the infrastructure to be able to support it? But I think overall, it's something that needs to be, organizations are starting to kind of discover what they can do with it and how they can play with it a little bit, and the impact that it truly has on their business. And using it for very specific things, very specific high impact things. It doesn't need to be made for everything just because you can. So, excuse me. So we talked earlier about the employee revolving door. So this is there's going to be a fight for talent. So as that talent becomes, the fight for talent becomes more heated, that gap is really widening, and that downward pressure, we talked about this earlier, is to force L&D teams to be able to upskill new and existing employees on things that used to be just what you would normally hire somebody with. So it's really understanding what the profile is that you're looking for, what are the gaps that you have, and then how can you create the learning opportunities, or create the knowledge assets to allow people to get brought up to speed very quickly, to get to that baseline, and then be able to climb from there. There is a pent-up demand for people moving. So there will be people job jumping here over 2019, because there is a fight. There is that talent gap, and anybody who has really rock solid skills and has those proven results, there will be a fight for that talent. So it's a matter of how can you help augment the other talent pieces that are in place. Another big thing that's happening is the strategic outsourcing. Again, we talked a little bit about this, so I'll spend just a little bit more time on this because I want to make sure we have time for additional questions. Is with the increased demands on upskilling and hiring people and doing all those things, what we're seeing is that there's a push to decrease cost, but push up efficiency, effectiveness, and quality. And so a lot of organizations, what they're starting to do is really have a scalable bench of folks, so they can really be able to use the variable workforce model to be able to save money, to bring key talent in when they need it, push it away when they don't. So you're starting to see that it has to be you have to have a strategic outsourcing partner. It can't be kind of that traditional outsourcing where it's they come in, they punch widgets, how many widgets do you need us to punch? But really have a good partner that will come in and say, let's talk about what your needs are. Let's talk about what's happening in the business. How can we build the infrastructure to help support where you're going, so that they can provide you with that scalability that you need, keep the costs reduced, but continue to have that high level of support for the organization and both the operational side of the organization, but then also from the L&D standpoint, be able to help support that piece. So the old methods of outsourcing are no longer going to work. So those organizations that have been doing it for, been kind of plodding through it for a long time, those methods and modalities no longer are going to be relevant or helpful, because it's not a matter of how do you punch a widget. It's a matter of how do you understand the performance needs of the organization? How do you develop those performance interventions? How do you provide those knowledge assets, and really be pinpointed and targeted in how you do it in a very high touch, high consultant kind of feel to it, while still reducing cost and doing those things. So there's an interesting balance there that's starting to take shape. So as people are talking about outsourcing, I would challenge you to look at the level of support that you get for the cost model that's currently in place. So before you make that jump. All right, with that, I will turn it back over to Laura to allow you to have any types of questions or anything. While we're doing that, while you're typing in your questions, we have a live webinar coming up. Laura, why don't you tell us about your webinar that's coming up for you and Tim?
Okay, well, very exciting. So I do, the next live webinar is February 5th, as you can see, and it's about training and change management and the symbiotic relationship that they have. So I'm excited to be presenting that. I will be, we'll be really talking about how to successfully leverage this very powerful relationship, particularly as you look at performance-based learning solutions. So looking forward to presenting this along with my colleague, Tim Youngman, who is a learning solutions architect here at Cavio. So hope you can join us on February 5th. So, and Jeff, I have a few questions for you.
You always have questions for me, Laura.
I do, I do. So adaptive learning was definitely a very popular topic for our attendees today. Do you have some other examples where we at Cavio have helped our clients in regards to adaptive learning?
Sure.
I know you talked about the call center. That was one of them, certainly.
Yeah, so right now I think we're working with organizations that have a lot of data that can be shared, because if you want to be able to look at so the transactions that somebody has to be at a level where you can start to interpret and get all the data that comes in. The reason why I use the call center is because it's very transactional. So you can start to really look at all those pieces. The challenge will be, as you start to shift it over towards, management, office work, things like that, things don't move as quickly there. Yeah. That's going to be the next challenge that comes around. So we've been working with our clients on the higher transaction pieces with the data lake and what is it telling us and doing those types of things, because it allows us to be able to make edits and make decisions quickly, so that we can start to really fine tune and crank in on what does that solution really look like. Those learnings we'll start to look at how do you then apply those learning over to the other aspects of the organization. So right now in 2018, we've been working a lot with investigation groups, call centers, manufacturing pieces. So just a lot of high transaction pieces, because there's a lot of learning that has to take place there for the organization, how to interpret the data, how to collect the data, so that way it can be applied to the things that are less transactional in nature.
Okay, fantastic. And I have another comment here from one of our attendees. As a learning leader, when we talk about, certainly this is in regards to the existing leaders assisting in the development process. This assumes that they are effective, capable, and they represent the direction that the company is going in the future. Is that correct?
And I chuckle a little bit because yes, absolutely. I mean,
yeah, I know.
Yeah, well, no, because I mean the thing is that's absolutely true, because you have to make sure that you're empowering those leaders to be able to help train and skill up those other leaders. So when you start to look at the cascade, it has to come from the top down. So the cascade has to roll all the way down. So it's because if they're not bought in, if their leader, so if you look at, so let's say it's a director level that's training the next manager below them, the director's manager has to insist on the performance metrics that are tied to being a good leader, that they have to continually look at ways of making sure that leader, that person who is responsible for training the future leaders, is meeting their certain criteria, their data metrics. To ensure that they are teaching the right things and they're moving in the right direction and they are in lockstep with where the organization wants to head. And because then if they're not a good leader. So it kind of comes back down to that.
Absolutely. And from a change management perspective, every leader is not always the best leader to head an initiative sometimes. So you have to pick the right people.
Absolutely. And the thing is, just because their boss is there, that doesn't mean that that's the leader that needs to train the next level of leaders.
Very true.
You can also, have them go out on an assignment to another team or another project, or have a cohort that gets put into place for a type of a team is being pulled together to solve a problem. So you can do things like that if, Sally's leader is not a good developer of other leaders. Well, you can take Sally out and put her into different, and give her different opportunities to grow under other leadership, which is, you should do that with every employee that you're trying to develop into a leader, because it gives them different perspective of how different leaders interact and function.
Very true. Absolutely. Can you share some detail about the most important the most important information or details that L&D units integrate into their dashboards? What do you see as key to generating, a solid dashboard or solid document?
Yeah, so there's two different dashboards within L&D that you need to look at. There's your internal L&D dashboard that really nobody outside of L&D really, they might be interested in it, but it's really to making sure that your L&D group is running like it should, like a business. So it's, looking at it saying, okay, are we designing and developing efficiently, effectively? Are we deploying our assets the right way? So you have that whole series of them. And I use something as simple as, people always laugh about butts and chairs. And I'm like, that is a great metric. Most of the other organization doesn't care about it, but that's a great metric, because then it lets you know, do you need to reinvest in your infrastructure around your classrooms and things like that? Do you need to reinvest there or not? So you can start to look at that aspect. Externally, you have another dashboard, or it's really a series of dashboards around for each of the different groups that you support. They should include things like what are their key initiatives that they have going? How are they proving out? Because when you're having a conversation with a leader and you're supporting them, when you're going through and developing solutions for them, or part of a solution for them, you want to use metrics that they're familiar with, that they trust, and that they rely on a regular basis, because then you're not arguing over, does this make sense? Is it right? Is it whatever? So you want them on your side of the table instead of across the table from you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And last, I'm going to get this in real quick. As a learning leader, what if I look around my L&D org and recognize that our personnel do not have the skill sets necessary to adapt to our firm's business plans?
So you really have a couple of choices. So it's either, do you feel that you can upskill them the right way? We have an organization that's actually going through this right now. We're going to be going and chatting with them here in the next couple of weeks. But one of them is how can you upskill that group? So you can upskill them by bringing in an organization that can help them ride along with them, so they can see the skill demonstrated. You might need to do some upskilling. So there might be some turnover inside your organization. So if you haven't had a lot of attrition. Attrition, while most people think it's negative, there is positive attrition. So you might have to go through that, or taking aspects of it and outsourcing pieces of it. So, those are kind of the three things I would look at that you have to make a decision behind is, do they have the capability of being upskilled? Do you need some positive turnover? And/or do you need some either augment your staff, or do you just want to outsource pieces of it?
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Jeff, thank you for this great presentation today. It was really insightful. Here we come, 2019, right? So absolutely. Join us for the next live webinar in February. We're looking forward to seeing you. I thank all of you, for those of you who have joined us for the webinars this year. Thank you again for attending and for continuing to attend. And we look forward to seeing you in 2019. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.